Section 1. I never thought a piece of paper could be a weapon until the day I held one up and watched my sister's face turn the color of old curdled milk. It wasn't a gun and it wasn't a knife. It was a standard government-issued boundary survey with a bright blue stamp that smelled like fresh toner and justice. But I am getting ahead of myself. You need to picture the scene to really understand the satisfaction of this moment. Imagine a humid Tuesday afternoon. The kind of heat that makes your clothes stick to you the second you step outside. I was standing on the back porch of the house I have owned for 40 years, clutching a glass of iced tea that was sweating almost as much as my sister, Sarah. Sarah was standing in the middle of my backyard, or what she claimed was her backyard, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at a patch of grass that she had suddenly decided was the answer to all her financial problems. She looked ridiculous. I hate to say that about my own flesh and blood, but she did. She was wearing these expensive Italian heels that were sinking into the soft soil with every angry step she took, creating little divots in the lawn I pay good money to maintain. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with that specific pitch of entitlement that only people who have never been told no can achieve. She was yelling about old family history and Dad's promises, and how I was a thief for planting my hydrangeas on her rightful inheritance. I just stood there, leaning against the railing, feeling the cool condensation of the glass against my palm, waiting for her to take a breath. I knew something she didn't. I knew that inside the manila envelope sitting on the patio table next to me was a bomb that was about to blow her entire delusional world apart. Before I tell you exactly what she said when I opened that envelope, I want to take a quick second to connect with you guys. I know family drama is universal, but I am curious where everyone is tuning in from today. So do me a favor. Pause the video for just a second, scroll down to the comments and let me know what city and country you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Go ahead, I'll wait. Alright, you back? Good. Because you are not going to want to miss the look on her face. So, Sarah's out there screaming that she's going to bulldoze my fence. She is threatening to sue me. She is threatening to call the police. She is threatening to call our cousins, our aunts, and basically anyone who will listen to her sob story. She really thought she had me cornered. She thought that because she was the younger sister, the one who always cried to get her way, that I would just fold like a cheap lawn chair. She thought I would say, "Okay, Sarah, just take the land, just stop yelling." But she forgot one thing. I am not the same pushover big sister I was when we were teenagers. I am 65 years old. I am a retired school teacher who spent 30 years dealing with unruly teenagers and their nightmare parents. I have patience, I have time, and most importantly, I have a very competent surveyor named Mike who measures things down to the millimeter. I watched her pull a tape measure out of her designer purse. A tape measure. She tried to hook it onto my rose bush and run it back to the property line she had invented in her head. It snapped back and hit her on the shin, and she let out a yelp that sounded like a stepped-on chihuahua. I didn't laugh, but I wanted to. I took a sip of my tea and finally spoke up. I kept my voice low and calm, which I knew would infuriate her even more. I asked her if she was done with her little performance. She whipped her head around, her hair sticking to her forehead, and screeched that this wasn't a performance, it was a reclamation. She used that word, reclamation, like she was some sort of conquering hero taking back a lost kingdom, rather than a greedy woman trying to steal 20 feet of backyard from her retired sister. That was the moment. That was the moment I decided I was done playing nice. I put my tea down on the railing with a solid clink. I picked up the manila envelope. The sound of the paper sliding out was crisp and loud in the humid air. I didn't walk down to her. I made her walk up the porch steps to me. She stomped up, mud clinging to those expensive heels, panting slightly from the exertion and the rage. When she got to the top, she snatched the paper from my hand, expecting, I think, to see a letter from my lawyer or maybe a settlement offer. Said she saw a map. A highly detailed, officially stamped, surveyor-verified map of our properties. I pointed to the thick black line that marked the boundary. I pointed to the little red stamp that certified the date, which was yesterday. And then I pointed to the X that marked exactly where she had been standing screaming at me. "You see that line, Sarah?" I asked her. "That line hasn't moved since 1984. And you see where you were standing? You weren't reclaiming your land. You were trespassing on mine." Her eyes scanned the paper. She read it once. She read it twice. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish out of water. The redness in her face shifted from anger to embarrassment, and then to a cold, hard realization that she had absolutely no leg to stand on. The silence that followed was heavier than the humidity. For the first time in her life, Sarah didn't have a comeback. She didn't have a lie ready. She just had the cold, hard geometrical truth staring her in the face. And let me tell you, the silence was absolutely deafening. But to understand why she wanted that land so badly, and why she was willing to destroy our relationship over a patch of dirt, we have to go back to the beginning. Because this wasn't really about the land. It never is. To really grasp why Sarah looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck when I showed her that map, you have to understand the 40 years of history leading up to that moment. I am a simple woman. My name is Lisa, and I spent 35 years teaching high school history. I dealt with facts, dates, and documented evidence for a living. I bought my house back in the early 80s when this neighborhood was nothing but dirt roads and potential. I worked 2 jobs in the summer to pay for the down payment. I scraped, I saved, and I ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches to make sure I never missed a mortgage payment. This house isn't just a building to me. It is the physical manifestation of every sacrifice I ever made. It is my sanctuary, my retirement plan, and the only place where I can drink my coffee in peace and listen to the birds. Then there is Sarah. Sarah is my younger sister by 10 years. She came along when my parents were older, more tired, and significantly more lenient. If I was the practice kid they were strict with, Sarah was the victory lap they decided to spoil rotten. She was the baby, the princess, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, if I got an A-, I was asked why it wasn't an A+. If Sarah actually showed up to class, she was taken out for ice cream. I don't say this to sound bitter, really, I made my peace with it years ago. But it established a dynamic that has haunted us for decades. Sarah learned very early on that if she cried loud enough or manipulated the situation skillfully enough, the world would bend to her will. She moved through life expecting safety nets that she never helped weave. We have very different lives now. While I was paying off my mortgage, Sarah was bouncing between career paths that looked more like hobbies. She tried to be an actress, a life coach, a boutique owner, and a vague consultant for businesses that never seemed to exist. She married 3 times, and each divorce was apparently never her fault. It was always the husband or the lawyer or the universe conspiring against her. She burns through money like it is oxygen. You saw those shoes I mentioned earlier, the ones sinking into my mud? Those cost more than my monthly utility bills combined. That is Sarah in a nutshell. She will buy a designer purse while her electric bill is overdue and then call me crying that she is sitting in the dark. This brings us to the old family history she was screaming about in my yard. See, about 15 years ago our father got sick. He needed care, and since I was the responsible one with the steady home, he moved into my spare bedroom. I took care of him until the end. Sarah visited when it was convenient, usually when she needed cash. During that time, Dad loved to sit on the back porch and look at the yard. He would ramble a bit, as elderly folks sometimes do, about how big the lot was and how it could fit a whole other house for the grandkids. It was wishful thinking, just idle chatter from a man who wanted his family close. He didn't own the land, I did. His name was never on the deed. He didn't contribute a dime to the mortgage. But Sarah, with her selective hearing, latched onto those ramblings like they were legally binding gospel. About 6 months ago, Sarah hit another financial wall. Her latest business venture, some sort of crystal healing app, went belly up. She was broke, single again, and desperate. She came over for dinner one night, acting strangely sweet, complimenting my pot roast and asking about my health. I should have known she was scouting the territory. Over dessert she dropped the bomb. She told me, not asked me, that she was going to place a prefabricated tiny home in her half of the backyard. She said she had already looked at models and found a contractor. When I choked on my coffee and told her absolutely not, her face changed. The sweet sister vanished and the entitled monster came out. She started gaslighting me immediately. She claimed Dad had gifted her the back half of the lot on his deathbed. She said everyone knew it was hers. She said I was stealing her inheritance by keeping the whole yard to myself. It didn't matter that I had the deed. It didn't matter that I paid the property taxes. In Sarah's world, if she wanted it, it was hers. She started coming over when I wasn't home, pacing off the land, putting up little flags. She even told my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, that she was developing the estate. It was embarrassing. I tried to reason with her. I showed her my bills. I reminded her that Dad had no authority to give away my property. But you cannot reason with someone who has built their entire identity around being a victim. The entitlement had festered for so long that she actually believed her own lies. She looked at my stability, the stability I built with decades of hard work, and felt it was something she was owed. She didn't see a sister, she saw a resource to be harvested. And when I finally put my foot down and locked the gate, she didn't just get mad. She got vindictive. That brings us to the escalation that forced me to call the surveyor in the first place. Because Sarah didn't just stop at yelling, she decided to try and rewrite history on paper, and that is where she made her biggest mistake. If you thought Sarah screaming in my backyard in those ridiculous heels was the peak of the drama, you are vastly underestimating how low my sister is willing to go when she smells money. Things didn't just stay in the realm of disagreements. They crossed the line into straight-up criminal behavior. A few days after I locked the gate on her and her tiny home contractor, my phone started blowing up. I don't mean a few texts. I mean it was vibrating so constantly it almost walked itself off the kitchen counter. It was the family group chat. Now usually this chat is reserved for happy birthday wishes and pictures of overcooked turkeys at Thanksgiving. But that Tuesday it was a war zone. Sarah had gone nuclear. She hadn't just complained to the family, she had presented evidence. She sent a picture to the group chat of a crumpled, coffee-stained piece of notebook paper. The caption read, "Found this in Dad's old Bible. He wrote it the week before he passed. Proof that he wanted me to have the land to build my life. Lisa is hiding his final wishes." My stomach dropped. I opened the image and zoomed in. The handwriting was shaky, trying hard to mimic my father's blocky script, but it was all wrong. The loops on the Y's were too big. Dad wrote in all caps when he was serious. This was a mix of cursive and print. And the phrasing, it was laughable. It said, "I, Robert, hereby decree that my youngest angel Sarah gets the north backyard for her future endeavors." Endeavors. My father was a mechanic. He never used the word endeavors in his life. He would have said projects or work. And he certainly never called Sarah youngest angel in written documents. He called her Sadie. But the worst part wasn't the obvious forgery. It was the date at the top. It was dated November 12th, 3 years ago. I remember November 12th perfectly because I was sitting by his bedside in the hospice wing. He had lost motor function in his hands 2 weeks prior. He couldn't hold a spoon, let alone write a decree about land boundaries. He was sleeping 20 hours a day. The letter was a complete and total fabrication. It was a lie written by a desperate woman who needed a free place to live because she had blown her savings on crystals and trips to Cabo. I tried to type this into the chat. I started explaining the date, the handwriting, the medical impossibility of it. But before I could hit send, the flying monkeys attacked. That is what they call them in psychology, right? The narcissist's enablers. Aunt Linda, who has never liked me because I once corrected her on a history fact at Christmas in 1998, chimed in immediately. "Lisa, how could you? He was a dying man. Give your sister her share." Then my cousin Mike, who owes Sarah money, added, "That looks like Uncle Bob's writing to me. You're rich, Lisa. You have the house. Why are you being so greedy over a patch of grass?" It was suffocating. Sarah had successfully painted a narrative where I was the villainous, wealthy older sister hoarding assets, and she was the struggling, beloved underdog just trying to honor our father's dying wish. She didn't care that the land was legally mine. She didn't care that I bought it 20 years before Dad even moved in. She was banking on the court of public opinion forcing me to cave. She thought the social pressure of the entire extended family calling me a thief would break me. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. Not from fear but from pure white-hot rage. It is one thing to demand money. It is another thing entirely to use the memory of our dead father as a prop in a con artist's game. That forged letter changed everything. It meant she wasn't just delusional, she was calculating. She was willing to falsify documents to steal my property. That afternoon I didn't reply to the group chat. I didn't call Aunt Linda to argue. I realized that arguing with emotions and family feelings was a losing battle. They wanted a soap opera and I was trying to give them a documentary. I needed to stop fighting on her turf. I needed indisputable cold hard facts. I needed something that didn't care about youngest angels or sob stories. I drove to the town clerk's office first thing the next morning. I pulled the original deeds from 1984. Then I made the call I should have made weeks ago. I called a licensed surveyor company. I told them I needed a stake survey, done immediately. I told them there was a boundary dispute and I needed the markers located, verified, and mapped with an official seal. I was willing to pay the rush fee. I was willing to pay double. While I was setting this up, Sarah showed up at my door again. She didn't have the tape measure this time. He had a copy of that fake letter in a plastic sleeve. She stood on my porch, looking smug, fueled by the supportive texts from our misguided relatives. "The family agrees with me, Lisa," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm going to start clearing the brush on Saturday. If you try to stop me, I'll sue you for defying the will." She actually believed her own con. She thought a scribbled note on notebook paper superseded a recorded property deed. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "You go ahead and try, Sarah," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "But before you break ground, I'm having a professional come out. Just to make sure we're all accurate." She laughed. She actually laughed in my face. "Measure whatever you want," she sneered. "Everyone knows where the fence line is supposed to be. You're just stalling." She had no idea what was coming. She thought the surveyor was just a formality I was using to delay her. She didn't know that I had also asked the surveyor to look for something specific. A detail about the original subdivision of the lots that I remembered from when I bought the place. Something that would make her claim not just wrong but physically impossible. The morning the surveyor arrived, the tension in the air was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. I had made sure to be up early, drinking my coffee on the porch, waiting. I wanted to be the first face he saw. His name was Mike, a burly guy with a sunburned neck and a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated immediately. He pulled up in a white truck loaded with tripods, stakes, and high-vis gear. He looked like a man who dealt with property disputes for a living and had absolutely zero patience for drama. I walked down to the driveway to greet him, shaking his hand and handing him the copy of the deed I had retrieved from the clerk's office. He nodded, looked at the paperwork, and said, "Standard verification. Shouldn't take long. I'll find the iron pins, flag the corners, and draw you up a certified plat." Of course, nothing involving Sarah is ever standard. Just as Mike was unloading his total station, that is the fancy camera-looking thing on the tripod, Sarah's car screeched into the driveway behind his truck. She hopped out, looking like she was dressed for a brunch rather than a construction site, clutching her plastic-sleeved fake letter like a shield. She didn't even say hello to me. She marched straight up to Mike, who was busy calibrating his equipment. "Excuse me," she announced, using her best, "let me speak to the manager" voice. "I am the beneficiary of the northern subdivision of this lot. I have documentation here from the previous owner." She tried to shove the forgery into Mike's face. Mike didn't even blink. He didn't look at the letter. He just adjusted a knob on his tripod and said, "Ma'am, I'm hired to survey the deeded property lines based on county records. Personal letters don't change coordinates." It was beautiful. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Sarah huffed, crossing her arms and glaring at him. "Fine. Measure it. But you see, the boundary is the old trellis line. Everyone knows that." This was the crucial detail Sarah had hinged her entire scheme on. Running through the middle of my backyard, there is a line of old rotting wooden posts and some overgrown trellis work. To the untrained eye, or to a desperate sister looking for a loophole, it looks like a dividing line. It looks like a fence that separates the house yard from the back lot. Sarah had convinced herself and the rest of the family that Dad had built that fence to mark off the separate property he intended to give her. She thought that trellis was the legal border. I watched from the porch as Mike began his work. He started at the street, locating the front corners. He used a metal detector that looked like something a beachcomber would use, sweeping it over the grass until it let out a high-pitched squeal. He dug down a few inches, found the iron rod, and sprayed a bright orange circle around it. Sarah followed him every step of the way, hovering over his shoulder, making comments about how he was holding the pole wrong or how his GPS must be calibrated incorrectly because it wasn't matching her expectations. Mike just kept working, moving with the steady, methodical pace of a professional. Then they moved to the backyard. This was the moment of truth. Sarah ran ahead, standing triumphantly next to the rotting trellis in the middle of the yard. "Here," she shouted. "This is the line. Measure from here to the back. That's my half." She looked so confident. She really believed that because a piece of wood was stuck in the ground, it carried legal weight. Mike ignored her completely. He walked right past her. He walked past the trellis. He walked past the old oak tree. He kept walking until he was nearly at the dense brush that borders the creek at the very rear of the property. Sarah turned around, confused. "Hey, where are you going?" "You're way past the boundary," she yelled. Mike didn't stop until he was about 10 feet from the creek bed. He turned on his metal detector again. He swept the ground. Beep, beep, beep. He pulled out his shovel. Sarah stood by the trellis, looking unsure for the first time. I walked down the steps and joined her in the yard, though I stood a good 10 feet away to avoid the perfume cloud. We watched Mike dig. He cleared away about 6 inches of dirt and roots, and there it was, the rusted thick head of an iron pin driven into the earth 40 years ago. He took his can of orange paint and sprayed a massive, bright line on the ground, then tied a neon pink ribbon to a stake and pounded it in right next to the pin. He stood up, wiped his forehead and looked at Sarah. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "That trellis you're standing next to? That's barely the halfway point of this single lot. The property line is back here. The entire area from the street to this creek is one indivisible parcel recorded in 1984. Sarah froze. "No," she stammered, her face going pale. "No, that's impossible. The trellis. Dad said the trellis was the line." I stepped forward then, breaking my silence. "Dad didn't build that trellis, Sarah," I said loud enough for Mike to hear me too. "I did. In 1995. To keep the rabbits out of my vegetable garden. It's not a property line. It's just old gardening trash I never got around to tearing down." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The boundary she had been fighting for, the line she had told the whole family about, the marker she had based her fake letter on, it was nothing. It was a rabbit fence. Mike finished his measurements, packed up his gear, and walked back to the truck to print the official map. He had the data he needed to generate the document that I would eventually hand to her in the scene you saw at the beginning. Sarah just stood there in the middle of the yard, staring at the rotting wood, realizing that her entire claim was built on a misunderstanding of a vegetable garden. But she wasn't ready to give up just yet. She had one more desperate, venomous card to play before I handed her that map. Mike finished up the final paperwork in his truck, printed off the certified map and walked back to the porch where I was waiting. Sarah was still standing near the rabbit fence, refusing to believe the iron pins existed, staring at the bright orange flag as if it was personally insulting her. Mike handed me the document, a large folded sheet with the property boundaries meticulously drawn in thick blue lines. There was a raised, official seal stamped over his signature, the seal of the Commonwealth, the seal of undeniable fact. I unfolded the map slowly. This was the moment you saw at the very beginning of the story, the moment I felt the power of documented proof. It was crisp, clean, and utterly ruthless in its accuracy. Sarah finally dragged herself over to the porch. Her anger had curdled into a mix of panic and utter desperation. She knew the game was over, but she had one last venomous card to play. "You can draw whatever lines you want, Lisa," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous now, the volume having failed her. "But Dad told everyone the land was mine. I have the family behind me. This map might be your truth, but his final wishes are the real truth." She was trying to shift the battleground back to emotional blackmail, counting on that guilt I felt from the family group chat. She was appealing to my conscience, something she herself rarely employed. I looked down at the map, then up at her. This was the culmination of 40 years of dealing with her entitlement. I wasn't the tired, pushover big sister anymore. I was the homeowner, the taxpayer, and the executor of my own peace. I didn't get angry. I got quiet. I pointed to the stamp on the map. "The surveyor's seal," I said calmly. "It means this map is legally binding, Sarah. Your father's final wish, the one you conveniently discovered 3 years later in a Bible, is a piece of paper you yourself typed out and then forged his signature on." I let that accusation hang in the humid air between us. I didn't shout it. I said it like a statement of fact, like pointing out that the sky is blue. Her jaw locked. She hadn't expected me to call out the forgery directly. She had only expected me to argue over the authenticity of Dad's signature, not the legal ramifications of creating a fake will. I took one step closer, still holding the map like a shield. "I paid a rush fee for this survey, Sarah, because I knew I needed to stop this before you committed a felony. Falsifying documents to claim property is a serious crime. The county clerk has a copy of this map now. I also have the original deeds. And I know the date that Dad lost the use of his hands. I can argue with you all day, but you cannot argue with the police department's fraud division. That was the breaking point. Not the map itself, but the sheer horrifying realization that she had crossed the line from being a greedy sister to a criminal. The color drained from her face completely. She didn't say another word about the land, the will, or the family. The air went out of her and all the rage and entitlement crumpled instantly. She looked at me, a flicker of pure hatred mixed with panic in her eyes, before she spun around so quickly that her Italian heels, now completely covered in my backyard mud, nearly slipped on the porch steps. She didn't look back. She didn't grab her fake letter, which fluttered down to rest by the railing. She just walked straight to her expensive car, yanked the door open, threw herself in, and sped out of my driveway, leaving a spray of gravel in her wake. The sound of her tires squealing as she tore down the road was the sound of my peace finally returning. I stood there for a long time listening to the blissful, sudden quiet. The only sound was the cicadas and the gentle rustling of the leaves. The whole fight was over a 20-foot strip of land. A strip of land that had never belonged to her and never would. It was a humiliating public defeat for her, but for me it was pure, unadulterated relief. I went inside, picked up the phone, and typed one single message into the family group chat. The boundary has been officially verified by a licensed surveyor and recorded with the county. The entire lot belongs to me, Lisa. The matter is closed. I hit send, then I muted the chat and didn't look back. The property is still mine, whole and undivided. The rabbit fence is still standing, now just a funny reminder of the insane lengths people will go to for money they didn't earn. The hydrangeas are safe. The piece I worked 40 years for is back. Thank you guys so much for listening to my story. If you've ever had a family member try to steal something you worked hard for, let me know your story down in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this bit of revenge, and please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss my next story. Until then, take care.